Hi, I'm Clayton. I'm the pastor of Calvary Church in West Central Louisiana. We're a great rural church and had the privilege of being here about 29 years in a rural parish with about 24,000 people. For those of you who are not from Louisiana, a parish is the same thing as a county in most other states. We're passionate about the Great Commission, which that means we're passionate about making disciples because that's what we believe the Great Commission is all about. And so this vlog is that's what it is. It's about the assignment, which is to make disciples. And we're just glad to be with you today. I'm here with my good friend Tim. Tim's a retired sergeant major, among other things, and he's definitely not retired from ministry. He's passionate about men's ministry and making disciples, and that's why we're partnering together on this today.
Yeah. Thank you, Pastor Cyle. I appreciate it. I am so excited to be able to work with you and do discipling, making disciples that make disciples, and this podcast is a great opportunity, and I am so grateful for it. Yeah. As you just said, the last couple of podcasts, we've kind of lined out what it is to what discipleship means, and then what it looks like as far as the biblical definition of what a disciple is. And so today we're going to take a look at how Jesus made disciples and get a little bit further down in the weeds, look at a few more scriptures and things. So that's where we're at. Episode 4, if you'll come back and look next time, we're going to have a surprise guest on the podcast where we'll interview them, and it's one that's knee deep in making disciples, and we're really excited about that. So stay tuned for that.
Sounds good. We're excited. When I think about making disciples and the study that I've done and just reading lots of different people who make disciples, there's people that have been doing this for about 2,000 years. Yeah, and the one word that kind of categorizes or summarizes how Jesus did it, I think, is the word incarnational. It was all about relationship. It was he had a clear plan. He chose his disciples. He chose 12 men specifically. He called them to follow him. It wasn't just he chose them out of a lineup. He had a real specific purpose in those 12 men, and then he poured his life into them. He spent about 2.5 years with most of them, with them 24/7, 365. And then when he was doing that, he showed them how to do it. So again, it's all incarnational. Not only was he incarnated in the flesh, but he was incarnational in ministry. He didn't just stand on a rock somewhere and preach, although he did that. And then after he showed them how to do it, he let them do it. He delegated to them to do it and began to send them out to do it. And then he supervised what they were doing. And then he expected them to do it. And he made it clear to them that he expected them to do what he'd done. Yeah. And so that was kind of Jesus's pattern. It was relational, it was intentional, and it was reproducible. And that's what making disciples has got to be about.
Yeah, I agree. The Bible gives us step-by-step instructions on how to make disciples, and Jesus was the best example of that. And so kind of to back up a little bit there, an example of him making disciples where he told the fishermen to follow me. I think we use that as an example today where we follow him. And how do we do that? There's all kind of scriptures in the Bible that show how the disciples actually followed him. Yeah. And so Matthew 4:18-22 gives us some insight into that. And it says, while walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is also called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, follow me, and I will make fishers of men. Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in a boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So to me, that they had a choice. They could have questioned him. They could have balked at it. They could have said, that's not for me. Fish are for me, and we make a living fishing for fish. but they immediately obeyed him. They dropped their nets and they followed him, and they were all in. And so that is the example to take away, I think, that we can look at closely, is that we have to be obedient immediately. Sometimes if you don't obey immediately, you're being disobedient, and follow him. So
delayed obedience is just disobedience. And
I was looking for that word, delayed, for a second.
Thinking about when his first calling of James and John there, they're the sons of Zebedee. They were also called the sons of thunder, which meant Zebedee must have been the father of thunder. And I kind of think about that. I've kind of wondered in my mind about that calling, that day. They left their dad sitting there in the boat with these nets that he had to take care of, and he was the father of thunder. So I kind of wonder how Zebedee responded to that.
Yeah.
And see how that Jesus, as he walked with them, and again, incarnational, and we, of course, at Calvary, we've kind of coined the term for some of our small groups as DLT groups, doing life together groups, and it's on the job training. That's how Jesus made disciples. And the questions of the apostles when they were walking with him revealed that they were following. They'd come to see him. He said, "Come and see." They were following him, and they were watching him do that. When they were watching him in his life, the one thing they noticed about him was he was a man of prayer. And so they never did ask him to teach them how to preach, but they did say, "And teach us to pray, Lord," in Luke chapter 11. And then when the crowds abandoned him in John chapter 6, there were all those crowds, and then the 12 were right there with him. When the crowds abandoned him, and because he was teaching hard sayings, he turned to them and said, "You're going to go too? Are you going to leave also?" And Peter said, "Lord, to whom will we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you're the Holy One of God." And so they, while they believed in him in the beginning, their faith had matured. Peter's saying they had seen him do all these things and recognized that he truly was the Son of God. And another thing was when he said, "Follow me," it was a call to do life with him. And again, in their world, when a teacher, a great rabbi, called you to follow him, you kind of understood that meant leaving things behind and following. And we kind of I don't know that we really get that. We talk about believing in Jesus, and then we don't talk about necessarily about following him. And you've already touched on it, which is obedience. But again, that's how he did it with them, and it's clear they were not just repeating what he said. They were watching everything that he did. And I would love to have been there with them when they were just walking down the road in between these great events, and heard the interactions as they were chewing on all this stuff and trying to figure out exactly who Jesus was. And they still had lots of ideas about him being an earthly Messiah and a king of Israel that was going to be some type of geopolitical thing, and didn't realize that he was coming to bring a much greater kingdom, and was inviting them to be part of that work.
Yeah, I think the word that keeps coming to mind as you're talking there is the word model. He set an example, or he modeled for them what it should look like. And if we take that literally and we model what that looked like today, it becomes a lot more challenging. You look at what's going on in the world today, all of the technology and our busy lives and everything, as men and women, it becomes more of a challenge. They have lived a lot simpler life, maybe harsher. We have a lot of amenities and things they didn't have, but to drop the technology and all of the sporting events and all of those things, particularly as fathers and as men, to disciple our family, which is first and foremost, and our children, we have to learn the model he set, and then we need to further model that. And it's making disciples that make disciples comes to mind there. So 1 Peter 2:21 lines that out a little bit. And it says, "For you were called to this because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth." So that goes straight to dying to self, picking up our cross, and following Him daily, and following the model He set for us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he chose them, he called them, he taught them, and then he showed them, and then he had them do it. And every time, I was looking at this. Every time he intended to feed a crowd, he kind of laid that on their plate. It was like, you've seen me do all these things. Yeah. Now this is on you. And he began moving them towards, you're going to do this. That's that reproducible part of disciple making. When there were 5,000 men that he fed besides the women and children, Matthew 14:16 says they don't need to go away. They said, Lord, send them away. We can't handle this. Lord, send them away. You give them something to eat. You give them something to eat, the Lord said. And, and I think that's the deal with making disciples. I think sometimes we want to make it, if you're in a disciple making relationship with somebody and they're growing and you're seeing them grow, and then it's okay, now it's time for you to do this. It's time for you to try this. Chances are they're going to be a little anxious about it, just like the apostles were, but we still have to push towards that. When he was feeding the 4,000, he said, what are we going to feed them? Always putting it back on their plate. And I love when he looked up and he saw the people, and he was talking about the harvest that was there for the kingdom. And in Luke 10:2, it says that Jesus said that the harvest is abundant, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest. And then immediately he sent them. And it's just, Jesus is continually showing us that this is not just about hearing his words, but it's about the impact that his words are supposed to have on our lives. And showing them wasn't enough. They had to do it. And a disciple, our definition, or my definition of a disciple is someone who believes in Jesus, who follows Jesus, who's being changed by Jesus, and who is committed to the mission of Jesus, which is to make disciple makers. And so it's not just a matter of, I believe in him and I'm going to learn about him, but I'm going to follow him. And that means if his mission was making disciples, then my mission is making disciples.
Yeah, I think it's about transformation. I wore this T-shirt today. This came from a recent retreat that we had. And, being transformed, they were being transformed as they watched and followed him. And so, he rebuked pride. He corrected them as he went. He was always aiming to transform their hearts into the image of himself. It wasn't just about managing their behaviors, but about transforming them. And John 13:15 tells us that Jesus washed his disciples' feet, saying, "For I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you." And so we see Jesus, put a towel around his waist and wash his feet. And then we remember the story of Peter, who balked at that because, you're not going to wash my feet. But Jesus wanted to set that example and model for them what they were to do for others. And so transforming hearts, loving others as Christ loved us as we go. And so that's the goal.
Yeah. He preached. Some people, if you look at the ministry of Jesus and the model where he took these 12, and then there was another larger group of people around those 12 that were helping. I've heard people talk about that. So, when you say, "Look, that's the model we should follow," well, then what about the crowds? What about all the crowds of people? Well, he still preached to the crowds. He preached, but the majority of the crowds didn't follow him. And of course, that whole John 6 passage is about that. It's about these crowds that, when it really got time to are you going to go or are you not going to go with me, they chose to go back. And so he knew that. Of course, we don't have that insight, but we preach to the crowds, but we invest in the few. And he invested in the 12, and then he really invested in Peter, James, and John, the three. And this is what he taught them, that as he followed them, like when they were following him, they didn't just hear his teachings, they were also watching his example, like we're talking about. but they also saw how he made disciples. And if you look at the narrative of the New Testament church in the book of Acts and in the rest of the New Testament, you see Paul talking about these specific small group of people that he was really close to. And there's Paul and Barnabas, and there's Paul and Timothy and Titus. Yeah. And so there wasn't, and Paul preached to the crowds, and Peter definitely preached to the crowd on the day of Pentecost. But immediately after that, on the day of Pentecost, when the scripture describes in Acts chapter 2 and 3, and then again in 4, when it describes what the early church was doing, it says they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, so they gathered together daily, probably in the Temple Mount, and then they heard the apostles' teaching. But then it says that they went house to house. They lived it out in these smaller groups, house to house. And that's a model that we have been following for a long time in the church. But the thing that I think is difficult as a pastor trying to make disciples and thinking about other pastors who are doing that, we're trying to get people to the church. We're trying to get people to worship so they can be taught. We're trying to get people to Bible study groups so they can be taught. But then if you're a disciple-making pastor and you begin to do that with a smaller group of men, you understand the time crunch even more, because you want to show them how to do it, but you've already got Sunday morning and Wednesdays and visits and all those kinds of things. So it's a challenge for me to really to move beyond that. And I've really been thinking about that right now with the group of men that I'm discipling right now, because they're more than capable and ready to go and do their own thing. But I'm trying to figure out how to work in the walking along the road stuff over the next several months, so that we're not just coming together once a week and praying for one another and encouraging one another. That's the tough part. And I think especially in our age today, with and you've mentioned all our games, internet, work. The enemy has helped us to fill up our schedules so much so that we really can't. We really don't have the time. We're going to have to say no to something so we can say yes to the Lord. And I hear people talk about, I'm teaching my kids how to follow Jesus on the ball field and, at the hunting camp. And you are, but the thing is when's the last time you shared the gospel with somebody at the ball field? When's the last time, are you teaching your son, your daughter to share the gospel at the hunting camp, that kind of thing. And it's difficult. Following Jesus is difficult, but it's so important and so fulfilling too.
Excuse me. Yeah, I love the DLT groups that you have here at Calvary, and I've only been a member here for a few months, but we've started a DLT, and we started out with 6 men, and that's really too many, and it's kind of pared down, but we've realized that it's more than just getting together and reading and studying the Word. Well, the Word is where it's all at, but do life together. It takes us staying in touch with each other. And so in our group, for instance, one man works in Texas, one lives on the other side of Toledo Bend, one lives close to me, one lives over here in Manny. And so it's difficult to walk together and do life together like Jesus did with the disciples, but understanding that he set an example and set that model for them to parrot, if you will. Whoever's kind of leading out in the group has to kind of go a little step further with that. And I think, and this is open, I guess, for discussion, is technology does help. But if you're going to have a D group strictly over a Zoom or a team meeting, and that's all you ever do, then you're not really doing life together. You're studying the Word together, which is the key to it all. But getting together and being more intentional about walking in life with children side by side, family side by side. We see a lot of things going on around here today. Iron sharpens iron is a big movement of men that are getting together and they're worshiping and doing all that. It's, coined parachurch, which is kind of outside the church. there's opportunities there to for men to get saved. I've seen that, and I've seen guys start to do a little life together and check on each other, call each other, love each other when they're down and when they're hurting, and all of those type of things. But it's not going on within the church. But being intentional about it, using the technology that we have in today's age and trying to apply that model to what we have going on in life today, we have to adjust fire a little bit, because I don't think everybody's going to get together and strap on sandals and walk down a dusty road together.
Yeah, that's the real challenge. And when I was really working on, when we as a church were working on implementing a strategy here that would help us to make disciples, that was one of the things that was always in the back of my mind. And, I've talked to different disciple making experts about that. Just we live in a different culture. For Jesus, it was, a doing life together thing was just built in. You were going to walk from this little village to the next village, and, the opportunities were going to be in front of you. And we just have to be faithful to create those. And that's one of the things I heard someone say years ago, teaching on how to pray. It's like, well, how did you learn to pray? Well, you primarily learn to pray by listening to other people pray, and I thought about that and began to listen to people pray. And it's interesting that I can hear that. I can hear, being in the same church for 29 years, being around a lot of the same people for that amount of time, I hear people pray who are younger in the faith, and I realize, you're praying, you sound just like brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so or whatever pray. And that's okay, because, that's how we learn how to do it. I think there's this idea in our society about, originality and there's nothing new under the sun, the scripture tells us, and so it's just important for us to carve out time for that. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of Christians are just not making disciples, because they're not carving out the time to go beyond, even if they love the Lord and they're really into the study of the Word and they pray for one another and they have a small group that meets. The next step is always the difficult part. We've been doing this here at Calvary for 6 or 7 years now. And every time we've set up any kind of small group, there's been clear, specific focus. The Word of God, prayer, accountability, and service and evangelism. You need to be doing things together in those realms. And prayer and accountability and the Word of God generally get covered. But when it comes to the point to where, hey, next Monday night we need to not meet here, we need to meet down there and go and do this. Evangelism. And one of the things that I've done just practically is meeting in a real public place. Years ago, I had a small group, and we went to McDonald's over here, went to McDonald's and had our DLT there. And there was a woman there who was waiting for a ride to go home. We didn't know that. She kept going outside and inside, and she was an employee there. And we kind of talked to her for just a minute, and how are you? You okay? You need any help? And she started sharing with us, and found out that she was homeless. That she was a working homeless person, and she lived just outside of town here, and had found a place to set up camp by a pond so she'd have some water to wash her clothes. Wow. And she was hopeful, she was waiting for someone else to get off so she could get a ride home. And we invited her to sit down with us. There were 3 of us. There was a place at the table, and shared the gospel with her, and began to talk to her about her needs and trying to help out. And that was just, to me, that was a wonderful night, because it was like, this is what this is supposed to be about. And I think that's one solution, is just have your small group in a public place. And some people say, well, maybe that's too showy or whatever. Well, what's showy about it? Jesus preached in public. The early church met very much in public on the Temple Mount. that's just one way to kind of push us out into the world. And then it's just kind of whatever happens, happens. And be amazed how many times people will they're paying attention to you because you're doing this, and that's not why well, you kind of are. You're kind of doing this to call attention to Jesus, not to yourself.
Right.
I think that's, and I've kind of ridden that horse down, but I just said it's difficult to do. We have to be intentional about it, and we're not really making disciple makers until we have taken those steps to help one another to follow Jesus by doing those things that Jesus did.
He requires our obedience spiritually. In Matthew 28, we talked about that. Is one of the main scriptures in the Bible. The Great Commission, go ye therefore and make disciples of all nations, and that takes intentionality. Go. You have to get up, you have to go, and you have to plan, carve out that time. That you're talking about. And his disciples, to circle back, they laid their nets down and they followed him, and then they learned how to go because they went alongside of him and went alongside with him. And you're just talking about that lady, and I don't want to ride the horse too much longer, but we were doing a Bible study in a donut shop in Palmville, right outside Louisiana College there. And there was 3 or 4 older men that would come in every morning and sit off at a table, and they would have their coffee and donuts, but they were always listening because every now and then one of them would want to turn around and add something to the discussion. So we were like, y'all just pull up. They went to First Baptist Palmville, and we were from another church, but they would definitely were listening. So you've got to let people see Jesus drip off of you everywhere you go in all walks of life, not just at church on Sundays, but if you're tied to that ball field, then you actually have to do it at the ball field, not just say, well, I'm gonna make my children talk and act right, and so I'm teaching them. You've got to evangelize, spread the gospel, and let people see Jesus everywhere you go all the time. So
well, and you said a word there, intentional, and I think that's what Jesus was. He was intentional, and he gave his attention to it, and I think that's what we have to always keep on our minds is to do that. Again, incarnational, intentional. He invested his life in those men, and that's what we're here to do. And something else too, just real quickly as we wrap up here, is that it took 2.5 years, 3 years. I mean, Jesus was in public ministry about 3 years. Didn't really have the disciples. There's 12 together until maybe halfway through the first year, definitely all of them towards the end of the first year. But, he was intentional about that. He spent that time with them, but it did take time. And, you look at that statement of Peter where he says, we have come to believe that you are the one, the Son of God. And I think that's one thing we have to remind ourselves, or I have to remind myself, is this is going to take time, and put the time in. And I can say, I've been part of discipling someone and put the time in, and it didn't seem to bear any fruit, and that's really discouraging. And I'm sure people have done the same thing with me. And then I've put the time in with other men and women and families, and seen them just continue to follow the Lord, and then see them go and make disciples too. And you're never gonna bear the fruit, and never gonna see the fruit if you don't plant the seed. And then you can't just plant the seeds. You gotta take care of the garden too. So
pick the weeds.
Yeah. Well, I anything else, or we get?
No, I mean, we could stand on that. It's a wonderful conversation, and I'm always excited when I start listening and talking about it, because I learn and things come back to mind. But as you was just talking there, a recent retreat that we had, there was 5 salvations at that retreat. Professions of faith. They seem to have a true conversion experience there with that. And so we circled back and started discipling them on the backside. And just as you explained, a couple of those have already fallen away. Several of them have plugged into a local church and are being discipled. And so we can't just do the evangelism part that a lot of people want to do. We have to take it that next step and, make disciples. We have to teach them to obey all things that He's commanded, and then model that for them. Because some people learn audibly, some people learn visually, and so you have to show it to them both ways.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Yep. So.
Well, thank you for watching today, whatever day it is you're watching this on. And I just want to ask you again to subscribe to us and like the video, and please comment on the video. We'd love to continue this conversation with you. And we do have guests planned to come, and not just one. We have some others we'll be planning to talk with in the future. And if you have some suggestions, or you have some questions, some things that you'd like to see us address or talk about or work through, man, we'd love to hear those too. And it's a joyful thing to do, and it's great when we get together with other men and talk about how to do this together. And we don't mention women a whole lot here because we're primarily discipling men. I don't spend a lot of one-on-one time with women except with my wife. And, but she's discipling women. And so we probably ought to have an episode when we have ladies come in and talk about the unique ministry of disciple making of women. And also want to talk about at some point about, how to make disciples of our children, and what are the unique things that go on in there, and what are some tools that maybe we could give one another to help us do that. So again, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment, and come back at the next episode. We'll try to have it on there a little quicker than this one, but we're just excited that you're watching today. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.